I want to move on and talk about this story that's been developing. We discussed it a little bit on the last show. The Mercer Street was, I guess, there were really two attacks, I guess, on alleged attacks on ships in the Gulf of, or off the coast of Oman. One an attempted hijacking, and then one this attack on the Mercer Street. It seems like the attack on the Mercer Street is the one that's getting a lot more attention and condemnation from the international actors. Everybody is blaming Iran. When I had talked about last on the show, I don't think the U.S. had put out any evidence at all that Iran was behind the attack. Now they have released some pictures, and so what's going on here, Dave, and what do you think about the evidence? I believe CENTCOM put it out.
Yeah, so the Mercer Street, it was hit on July 30th by a drone, and it killed two crew members, a Romanian and a British national. So CENTCOM put this out last Friday, pictures of the hole in the pilot house on the ship and what they said was debris from the drone, and it was just like two pieces of fin and the stabilizer or something. And they said, "Oh yeah, this is proof that Iran did it because this is an Iranian drone. The fin just looks like the fins on the drones that Iran makes. So it was Iran. So obviously it's not conclusive evidence, but the U.S. is using this as proof, and they're joining Israel. They accused Iran right away before this so-called evidence was put out. So now Blinken was at the UN yesterday, and he said that the world should, respond and hold Iran accountable for whatever that means. Israel's been making more explicit threats. Benny Gantz, the defense minister, said that Israel is ready to attack. Iran denies that they were responsible for the attack, and even if the drone was made in Iran, it doesn't mean that Iran did it. There's plenty of groups in the region with Iranian arms that kind of have their own reason to attack an Israeli ship. And this is another strange detail of it, is that the ship kind of has a vague connection to Israel. It's Japanese owned. The crew members that died are Romanian and British, and it's managed by a UK based company, Zodiac Maritime, I believe it's called, which is owned by an Israeli billionaire. So it's kind of a long way to go to attack Israel. And the timing of it is weird. Iran's new president came into office. I don't think Iran would be looking for an escalation at this time. And, all the media outlets, they portray it as part of this, what they call a shadow war between Israel and Iran. And there's been reports that said, and Israeli officials, speaking to media outlets, have admitted to these attacks. There's been Israeli sabotage and attacks on Iranian ships in the region since 2019, at least 12, according to the Wall Street Journal. So we know Israel's been doing these attacks. And Blinken's speech at the UN, he says, "Oh, if we let them get away with this, we can't show them impunity, or they'll do it again." But I mean, the hypocrisy is just, it's just staring you right in the face, because Israel is constantly attacking Iran, not just the ship attacks, but also inside Iran, and assassinating scientists and blowing things up at nuclear facilities. I mean, really dangerous stuff, and the U.S. never even acknowledges it. So yeah, it's just hypocrisy. And there's another strange report that I wrote about yesterday.
Can I just highlight one more thing on the Israel ship point? That not only has Israel been doing this, but especially under the Biden administration, a lot of the timing has been very suspect with the timing of U.S.-Iranian nuclear negotiations. One of the particular ships in the Red Sea was just after the U.S. and Iran announced that they would be holding indirect talks in Vienna. Israel then went and openly attacked an Iranian ship in the Red Sea. And it's unbelievable that the Biden administration pretends that this is something that's just happening with Iran, when Israel is doing it to Iran to undermine U.S. Iranian diplomacy. It's shocking that they can't acknowledge that it's happening maybe both ways, which is why I'm somewhat suspect that maybe Iran was behind this, just because it would seem accurate and sensible retaliation. Not that that necessarily makes it true, but it does seem like there's maybe some motivation there. If it were to happen, I wouldn't necessarily be surprised, as the U.S. and UK are waging a pretty severe economic war against Iran right now. There's a lot of reasons for Iranian motivation.
And Israeli airstrikes in Syria. I mean, they're constantly bombing Syria, and they kill these militia fighters that have, Iranian arms. I'm sure that they have some drones, and those attacks they never go they're never answered. Israel bombs Syria with impunity about every week, at a weekly rate. So to act so surprised that something like this happened, it's just such hypocrisy from the U.S. But a lot of Western media, they don't cover these Israeli attacks, only kind of the big ones, like at Natanz and the assassination of the scientist. Few people understand how aggressive Israel is in the region against Iran and its allies.
So let's get into who was behind this, because again, they released some pictures, and then you wrote up today this story I found really fascinating, that the U.S. and UK special forces were, I guess, deploying to eastern Yemen. So this would be the area of Yemen that's not held by the Houthis, and I guess is largely either like ungoverned Al-Qaeda or held UAE backed government, Saudi backed government of Yemen territory. But they deployed 40 soldiers there trying to hunt these people down. So what the hell is going on, Dave?
Yeah, this is really weird. So this is from the British paper, or some consider it a tabloid, the Daily Express. And they reported that 40 British Special Air Service soldiers, the SAS, arrived in eastern Yemen on Sunday to hunt down the perpetrators of the drone attack. And it said that they're working with U.S. special forces that are already there to train like some sort of Saudi commando unit. Now it wouldn't be a surprise that U.S. special forces are in Yemen. We don't know for sure. But
when the AP reported about the UAE torture prisons in Yemen, they did mention that U.S. special forces were regularly coming to mainland Yemen from a ship ashore. So that does kind of fit in line with this, right?
Yeah.
And that would have been this area of Yemen, Mokala, or one of those port cities in the east.
Yeah, that would make sense too. And then there is also, when Trump first came into office, there was that botched raid that I'm blanking on their name now, the Yemeni family that Obama killed, and then Trump came in and killed the young daughter. Yeah, that raid happened. So obviously there's special forces, or maybe there were Rangers that were in Yemen for that. And that war was going on. The U.S. war against Al-Qaeda in Yemen in 2017 and 2018, it was pretty. There was a lot of airstrikes and raids, while simultaneously backing the Saudis against the Houthis. I think if they're not, in the country at a, kind of constantly in the country, then they can get there pretty easily. But the strange part about this is that this is the only report that I've seen that said the British believe the drone was launched from Yemen. They quoted a senior UK military source who said everything points to the drone being launched from Yemen, and it said that the U.S. and Israeli intelligence also determined that. Which is kind of strange, because CENTCOM, nobody else has said anything about that. And it's not really the Houthis. They're fighting their own war. Fighting has been raging against the Saudis, the U.S. Saudi coalition there. So I don't think that they would have a reason to launch a drone at a ship that's vaguely connected to Israel.
Yeah,
So
and this
it's all
was,
kind of strange.
just to add real quick, Dave, this was just this morning before we went on, that CNN reported that a top DoD official confirmed that the attack came from Yemen, and then Idris Ali, who's the Reuters Pentagon reporter, says that the Pentagon spokesperson denied it. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting set of developments, that the Pentagon is still denying that it came from Yemen, even though we're starting to see some leaked reports that that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
So, anything else on this? Where any idea of where this, goes from here? It doesn't seem like the U.S. could really come up with any more conclusive proof than they've come up with, like alleging that the rockets being fired are missiles being fired by the Houthi were coming from Iran, and also it seems like the Houthi might have a lot of motivation to carry out this kind of attack on their own, and even if maybe they did get this drone from Iran, that this wasn't just some Houthi motivated plot because 400,000 of their children are gonna drop dead this year, and nobody seems to give a crap. And so maybe if you do this, you generate some headlines, and people will be somewhat interested in discussing the war in Yemen.
Yeah, I mean that's possible, but I don't. I think they, like I said, they kind of have their hands full right now with the fighting the Saudis and the Saudi-backed government in Marib. I mean, airstrikes have been pounding Yemen, and they've been suffering some pretty big casualties there. It's just weird, and with this stuff, you just never know, and the U.S. just lies and omits information about it. I mean, if you remember back in September 2019, there was that big drone attack on Saudi Arabia on their oil facilities, and obviously they blamed it on Iran, but leading up to that, the Houthis' drone technology was getting a little better and better, and they were launching attacks deeper inside Saudi Arabia. And there was all this reporting on it. The Wall Street Journal had all these reports about how accurate the Houthi drones were and how far they can go. And then when that attack happened, that was just all off, out the window, and they just blamed it on Iran. It was the same thing. They displayed the drones and they said, look at this drone. It kind of looks like these Iranian ones. But they never proved anything, and we should doubt their narrative. Even the idea that it came from Yemen, I'm skeptical of that. So I think if it was an Iranian drone fired by one of Iran's allies, my guess would be it was one of the Iraqi Shia militias that's constantly being bombed by Israel. But who knows? It's one of those things we'll never know. Could have been Iran, but hopefully the reaction, I mean, I don't see the U.S. signing up for any big escalations against Iran right now, the way things are. But who knows what Israel could do.
Right. Or I guess they could just punish the Houthi in Yemen. Would be one option. There's really nothing the Houthi could do back about it. And they can make a big scene about it. Because the UK seems to, have decided that this is one of the cases where the person who died actually counts. At least one of them. And, something needs to be done about it. Again, there was a ship that was attacked off the coast of Syria, an Iranian ship that killed 3 Iranians. And there's no mention of that anywhere here. One other thing that I thought was really interesting that you wrote about, this out of nowhere report U.S. mulling easing sanctions on Iran in exchange for nuclear freeze. And so it seems almost like what you're writing here, Dave, is that after 4 months and 6 rounds of negotiation in Vienna to restore the JCPOA, we're going to throw that out the window and try to take a new path forward with Iran, where things that Iran says are non-starters. They want to return to the JCPOA. They want to go that route with the sanctions relief, and not to do any of these piecemeal agreements, but now the U.S. is suggesting that.
Yeah, so I mean, this is just based on a report from Bloomberg that cited anonymous officials, but they say that the U.S. is considering options for if the deal isn't revived, and one of the options is limited sanctions relief in exchange for a freeze on Iran's what they called most provocative aspects of their nuclear program, which means the uranium enrichment. So this is another thing back to Israel. um, Iran has increased. They increased some uranium enrichment to 60% in April when the talks first started because Israel sabotaged their Natanz nuclear facility. There was an explosion. And, this is when the talks in Vienna first started, clearly an attempt to sabotage them. And the U.S. could not condemn it or say it was bad or say anything about it, even when they were asked. So that was Iran's reaction to that. And when Mohsen Fakhrizadeh was killed in November by Israel, Iran's parliament passed a bill that required uranium enrichment at 20%. So that's why they did that. But so I would guess that those are that's the freeze that the U.S. would want for limited sanctions relief. But yeah, who knows? I mean, it's not a good sign for the JCPOA. Iran's new president, Ebrahim Raisi, he, says he's willing to continue the talks. He has endorsed the JCPOA if the U.S. lifts sanctions. The EU, some EU officials said that they expect talks could start in September. But one of the reasons that this report said that the U.S. was considering these options is because of the tensions in the region in the wake of the Mercer Street attack. So maybe the U.S. knows something is coming, some kind of another Israeli attack that might make the negotiations kind of impossible and just like a temporary thing like this, or who knows? But I'm not very hopeful that the deal is going to be revived.
Yeah, I've been kind of leaning that way for a while now. It seemed like the path forward with the deal was so obvious that if you're going to make it this complicated, you were just trying to kill it. And now my concern is that if the Biden administration does this, it's going to be, and somewhat rightly portrayed as empowering the hardliner Rossi, right? Like if you had got under it and let this be Rouhani's victory, then he gets credit if this does improve the Iranian economy, assuming that's what happens when sanctions are removed. Now, if Rossi does it, he kind of gets to portray that maybe it was his hard line or more tough negotiations that got the deal done, where Rouhani was weak and look how we got taken advantage of. There's a really good article on this general thing that the U.S. has done throughout the history and how blatant the Houthis have been on this, that they like hardliners in charge in Iran because it makes it easier to portray the Iranian regime as they want. And so I really don't think there's a whole lot of interest in the Biden administration to get this done.